How many villains, boarders, slaves? 7. How many free men, soakmen? 8. How much wood, meadow, pasture? How many mills? How many fisheries? 9. How much has been added or taken away? 10. How much was the whole worth? How much is it worth now? 11. How much had or has each freeman or soakman there? All this is to be given in triplicate, that is, in the time of King Edward, when King William gave it, and at the present time. 12. And if more can be had than is had. The questions are 12 in number, and with them William the Conqueror's commissioners spread over the land, and from the answers given was compiled the Domesday Book. I much doubt if the stern king himself ever looked into these pages of remarkable penmanship. He had reigned 20 years in England, when at the Salisbury Gemet at Michaelmas 1086 it was made known that the inquiry was complete, leaving, one may suppose, the vast work of digestion and arrangement still to be done. In the following spring, an invasion of his territories required the Conqueror's presence in Normandy. As he rode through the flaming streets of Nantes, a fall from his horse hastened his end, and he was borne to the tomb in the cathedral at Caen, which is sought, I boldly say, by more travelled Englishmen, many more than seek his great survey in Chancery Lane. Quite characteristic of English indifference to our historical monuments is the fact that Domesday Book should be lying in the city of London, in a public place, accessible to all without charge, and at no more trouble than is required by signing one's name, and nobody sees it or even can tell where it is. From the nobodies I accept all historians and antiquaries, dull people like myself, given to moments of sly enjoyment in company with the dusty records of centuries long since dead, travelling Americans who underline Domesday in their guidebooks before losing sight of Nantucket Point and facing the open Atlantic, by chance a few others, but those very few. Yet it is not a long journey to Chancery Lane, nor is the hazard great to the public record. Office, wherein the Domesday Book is kept, and any weekday afternoon between the hours of 2 and 4 will serve. The attendant at the Record Office Museum, suppressing a yawn, will be glad to see you. At least he has always gladly welcomed me as a rare specimen of the Englishman so seldom to be found there. No doubt the indifference is largely due to want of announcement, for the Record Office Museum, with Domesday and 1,000 other historical documents of surpassing interest, Trafalgar and Waterloo dispatches, Guy Fawkes' confession under torture, the papal bull which made our kings defender of the faith, and what not else, does not advertise. Exeter, and therefore so called, which contains a copy of the original returns of the 5 western counties, and by comparison of the contents of the separate volumes of Domesday itself. All this, I allow, is solid fare, muckle thought and deep speech. With his wise men, King William had, before he determined thus to map out the values of the whole area of England that acknowledged his sway. This at least we know, that the step excited shuddering fear and grave suspicion among his English subjects, and not unreasonably. They knew their ruthless master, none better. They were fearful lest the inquiry should forbade new encroachments upon English liberties, and yet further confiscations from the people. It is written plain as day in the brief mention made by a nameless scribe in the Saxon Chronicle, whom I quote below. After this, the king had a muckle thought and deep speech with his wise men about the land, how it was set, and with what men. Then he sent his men over all England into each shire, and let them find out how many 100 hides were in that shire, or what the king had himself of land or cattle in those lands, or what rights he ought to have in the 12th month from that shire. Also, he let them write about how much his archbishops had, and his bishops, and his abbots, and his earls, and though I tell it longer, what or how much each man had, that was land sitting in England, in land or cattle, and how much it was worth. So very narrowly did he let them spear it out that there was not a hide nor a yardland, nor, it is shameful to tell, though he thought it no shame to do, so much as an ox or a cow or a swine was left, that was not set down in his writ, and all these writs were brought to him afterwards. The royal officers spread themselves over the country, armed with supreme powers. No mitred abbot, lord of vast lands with key to heaven and hell, no bishop, no priest should hold himself exempt from their inquiry. No baron be so formidable that he should dare refuse answer to their summons, nor was any man too humble to bear his testimony if it was required. It was the king's command they bore, which all should obey. Their work being accomplished, the royal officers embodied its results in the volumes of Domesday, written on the parchment with black ink and often with red initials and interlines, and business-like without ornament. Then they disappear. They did not attach their names. They are unknown, but from documents of a later date we regain the styles and names of a few. It was Remigius, Bishop of Lincoln, Henry of Ferrars, Walter Gifford, and Adam Fitzhubert, brother of Udo the Steward, who came to inquire into the counties of Worcester and other neighbouring with the Conqueror's writ, and the bishops of Winchester and Coutances headed the Domesday Commission for Cambridgeshire and the East Midlands, all men of weight, learned with the little learning that was attainable in the 11th century. They went into the town of the shire and the county, called together the great shire moot and the county court, and read the royal writ. Clothing them with authority, the sheriffs attended, officers of the king's own lands, the barons who held their lands direct from the king, and their French subtenants, all those who owed suit to the 100 moot, and the priest, the reeve, and 6 villains from every vill, and these upon oath gave the information the commissioners required. A jury was empanelled to take the evidence. Thus the inquiry proceeded. has led him to the conclusion that one half of them were Norman and the other half were English. Conquerors and conquered were alike bound by their common sworn verdicts. The impartial justice with which the inquiry was administered stands out conspicuously, evident to the most casual observer. First come the holdings of the king himself, then those of the churchmen and religious houses, then those of the barons, and following in order the lands of women, of the king's sergeants, of the few English thanes who retained land, and so forth. The royal officers questioned, and the scribes wrote down the description of each separate estate. They gave the measure of each, how many hides of land it contained, what plough land, what meadow and pasture, what woods, what fisheries, what number of men and ox teams it supported, what tax it paid. Often, as might be anticipated in a turbulent age, and so soon after the wholesale confiscations which attended the conquest of England, they found rights disputed. These they reported. The royal officers held no powers as lawgivers to do justice between the baron and the weaker neighbour, whose land he had wrongfully seized, to recompense the layman despoiled of his possession by the church, or to decide as often the merits of disputes between churchmen themselves. Their authority was limited to inquiry and report, and so they were content impartially to write down the disputed titles to land, the claymores, often in a separate section, treating the people of each race alike, leaving it to others to decide wherein the right lay. County by county, the inquiry was made complete, as the royal officers travelled in separate parties from one to another. Its results are contained, as already said, in 2 volumes, the great and the small, and the belief has been held that the larger volume was compiled first. Its companion, much less exquisite in penmanship and somewhat confused in order, seems at first glance to have been more carelessly done, perhaps after. The King's death. The small volume contains the returns of 3 East Anglian counties. Modern study has substantially agreed that this arrangement must be reversed, and has assigned to the small volume the earlier date. For one thing, it contains much detail, not to be found in the larger book. It gives a census of livestock in the 3 eastern counties it surveys, Essex, Suffolk and Norfolk, assisting to make quite a vivid picture of farm life in England so many centuries ago. What numbers of hackneys, oxen, sheep, swine and goats plus 3.5 hides, is held of Robert by Robert, then 4 villains, now 5, then and afterwards 6 boarders, now 4, then 2 serfs, now none, then as now 2 ploughs on the demesnes. Then the men had between them 2.5 ploughs, now 1, then 3 round seas, and 14 sign. Why should they purposely have been ignored? The craftsmanship is not always perfect. Mr. Ballard, Domesday Inquest, has pointed out that the Oxfordshire survey was completed before discovery was made that the lands of William Fitz-Ansculf and Asquith Mussard in that county were omitted. Accordingly, these lands were written in Ansculf's on the marginal space at the foot of one page, and the account of Mussard's property stretches across the feet of two other folios. The Oxfordshire estates of the Bishop of Coutances have somehow slipped into the Northamptonshire Domesday. Omitted lands have occasionally been entered on the side margins. There are marginal references to others, for which additional sheets have been inserted in the book. A marginal note indicates that something is still to be ascertained, as at Hustondon, RQQT Terra, inquire how many lands. The Domesday Book was written at Winchester, where for a century it was kept with other exchequer records there, then was removed to Westminster, probably in Henry II's reign. It was for long safeguarded in the chapter house, and since 1857 it has been the most precious object of a priceless collection of manuscripts at the Public Record Office in Chancery Lane. Admission free. Let me once more emphasise, between 2 and 4 o'clock afternoons, and all are welcomed, where it is little known and entirely neglected by the great unheeding public of the metropolis. Of the many problems which Domesday presents, the greatest is still the most elusive. Why was the survey ordered? The title might have informed. It has no title. Such reference to itself as is borne on the parchment pages is merely a writ, breve, a survey, descriptio, a description. Later times coined, for it is the word Doomsday, the day of judgment, which seems to have been in use as early as the reign of Henry II. Like the sentence to be pronounced on the dreaded last day, this was a judgment from which there was no appeal. The courts of law would listen to no questioning of its authority. In centuries when rarely was found a man who could read or write, an almost superstitious reverence grew up for and clothed the authority of Domesday. The robed judge, seated high above the throng in court, found in the leathern-bound volumes the decision which was unalterable as if taken from the Book of Fate. Ostensibly, Domesday is a taxing book, a record of the taxable resources of the kingdom, setting out the extent of the cultivable land, what portion each man holds, what it was worth in King Edward the Confessor's time, what it was worth when King William gave it, what worth at the time of the survey, and significant of its preponderatingly fiscal nature is that last question asked of the jurors, and if more can be had than is had, the king sought to obtain. An accessible record of the holdings in land of his subjects, that he might tell without delay what sum a tax imposed would bring into the royal treasury. Each shire and county is set out separately. The record of each is prefaced by a list of names of the holders of land, forming an index. With Domesday at his hand, the king could send out instructions to his officers at the different centres, and the tax be speedily collected. He could compare the return with the sum which ought to result, and see what persons were amiss in payment. As a taxing instrument, Domesday is admirably designed, though lacking the summaries and survey of his kingdom, which so set his subjects by their ears. This the learned have hotly disputed. It has been represented by ancient chroniclers that the reason for the survey was that every man should be satisfied with his own right, and not usurp with impunity what belonged to another. One fears they little knew King William, to attribute to him so beneficent a purpose. Later scholars have found in Domesday a preparation for war. They visualise it as a muster roll of the nation, a record which placed in the king's hands the names of all those who held land under liability for military service, and an estimate of the followers whom each should bring in his train, the war tax which each estate should bear, the quantity of supplies for the army it could provide. If that be the purpose, Domesday is a pitiless revelation of the devastation wrought by the conquest. It has been estimated that the total population shown by Domesday did not exceed 270,000 families. Oxford in the Confessor's time was a town of 721 houses. In that of King William, it had shrunk to a hamlet with only 243 poor dwellings. York under the Confessor contained 1,607 houses. They had been reduced in number to 967 by slaughter of the people in revolt and waste of the country. Others again have pointed out a wide diversity of objects that Domesday was well calculated to serve. Number 1. It would give the king exact knowledge of the extent of his own estates in